remember years ago being down at the dairy show, and there was a guy we met there that didn't know me or Donna at the time, and he says to us, sure, like this EBI, like sure, the fella who put together the EBI, sure, he never milked a cow in his life. That's what he said to Donna. And sure, Donna just said to him, look, I agree with you, he probably didn't, but that doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, it's down to the numbers. It's, do you believe that you can use data to improve the genetics in your herd? That's the question, and the irrefutable evidence is that you can, and we have, and it will continue to happen.
As mentioned at the start of last week's podcast, the Teagasc National Dairy Conference is taking place in the Talbot Hotel Clonmel on November 26th and the Kilmore Hotel Cavan on November 27th. With the theme of Pathways to Progress, it will cover milk prices, breeding, benchmarking performance, as well as water quality, precision grazing management and cost control, so something for everyone. Today, I'm joined by Joe Patton, Head of Dairy KT in Teagasc, to provide a bit of background to the theme and topics of this year's conference. And I started by asking Joe to first give a bit of context to the 2025 conferences.
This time last year, we were saying it was a horrible year in 24 that started off horrible at least and finished very well. It could actually look, it's nearly the opposite way around this year, isn't it? It's kind of a very good year that has a bit of a sting in the tail. It sort of feels like being 5 points up and giving away 2 goals in the last minute this year, doesn't it? Because the tide has gone out a fair bit on milk price, and very concerning for people. There's no two ways about it. And I think, and I was just we have as part of the conference we have Chris Walklin joining us. Chris is a milk market analyst. People might hear him from other platforms as well, but we were just chatting about this during the week. He was saying, like, look, one of the biggest things, and I'd say a lot of our own suppliers or our own farmers would say the same. It's the rapidity of, or the scale of the cut so quickly is what's caught a lot of people out, wouldn't it? I think that's what has been quite of a shock to people, I would say. When you start seeing, even this week, you see some processors cutting, 4% off base, that type of thing. The speed of the change has caught a lot of people, and he would say, and we'd see that ourselves, that even in the market, the people are looking at the market very closely. Almost caught on the hop a little bit around that. So it's a punch in the nose for farmers. There's no question about that. And like, it's very hard to find a silver lining in something like this. The only thing I would say is maybe if you compare it to the trends in 22 into 23, my recollection of that, and I could be wrong, is that it's sort of the price dropped, steadily, and then we found ourselves at a low price over a few months. This thing has happened quite quickly. If there's one small bit of thing that we could take out of that, it's just that maybe farmers are a bit more ready for it this time round. But that's very little comfort, I suppose, when you're seeing such a change in the price.
We'll leave Chris do the talking in terms of the analysis of the markets and so forth, and because it is very fair for you to say that, like, and he's obviously said, as you said there, he said it to you himself, like, that it has caught so many people on the hop. The prediction was that we would be okay till the end of the year, and that there was a correction, as they like to call it, coming at that point, but it came out of nowhere there in September, effectively. So I suppose the big thing really from our perspective then, as Teagasc, and trying to, like, we're not in the game of predicting milk prices and so forth, but we are in the game of trying to make people resilient to those shocks. And since COVID, they have been, like, the peaks have been very high and the troughs have been quite deep. So the volatility that we gave 10 years talking about in the run into quotas going, that never really materialised, I would feel, has started to materialise now. So it's creating a dairy farming system in an Irish context, from our perspective, that can survive these kind of dips, but also take advantage of the good years as well. So, like, what kind of indicators are we talking about having to look at there in terms of farm performance to hit those criteria that we're setting for people?
Yeah, like this is the thing, isn't it? That when we and you'd be so conscious of this, it sounds, and I hear it all the time, like it's all right for you, like, type of thing. And I get that, entirely, that, you see the swings in price. And I know, speaking to somebody who's outside of the industry, and not involved in farming at all, I think we forget that at times, that the general public, they tend to drive. They'll drive past farms, or they'll talk to their neighbours as farmers in a social setting, let's say, Stuart, and when we say 5 and 6 cents a liter, it doesn't sound like much, does it? It's only 5 or 6 cents, but for the average guy, that could be 50 grand, 60 grand a year at an average scale in terms of revenue. Where do you see it in any other, where do you see it? Only in people involved in commodity businesses, so the scale of that doesn't go, geez, like we're looking at this and all, like we're looking at over 1,000 sets of farm accounts every year. We totally get that, but um, I suppose, look, one of the things we've really looked at and with the good quality data that we have on some, good performing farms, one thing that we have to say, like, is that we probably have to, and we have been saying this for a while, we have to get away from the idea that, that farms have to be very responsive to this change in milk price, as in, that there's a huge amount of things you should be doing differently on a high price year versus a low price year. Or indeed, the other thing that we hear a lot is, oh, well, my system of production will do really well, or my farm will do very well on a high price year. Your farm will do better on a low price year, and we'll sort of swings and roundabouts, we'll meet somewhere in the middle. That's what we hear a lot, that farms tend to re-rank depending on milk price. When we've looked at this data for years now. The degree of re-ranking, Stuart, between high and low margin farms is actually quite small. So what I'm saying there is that the higher margin farms tend to stay the higher margin farms, irrespective of the milk price. Now, obviously, when milk price is low, they're top of the pile with a smaller profit, but they're in the black probably, and the people at the lower end of the scale are really feeling the heat. On a good milk price year, the rising tide lifts all boats, but still the top performing farms remain in the top bracket. So I think we have to start getting away from the idea that there's a way to do it when price is high and there's a way to do it when the price is low. I suppose we're given the constraints we have in terms of, where we're selling our milk into, our weather constraints, our stocking rate constraints, and all the rest of it. There's probably a sort of a set system there in the middle somewhere that allows us to kind of ride out the bad years, if you like, but and make good money on the good years. So really, the key message there, I suppose, is the right cow is the right cow, not irrespective of the milk price. Our grazing management strategies are the same. Our feeding our supplement levels and our stocking rates should probably keep relatively stable. The main area, I suppose, where there would be a difference between good years and bad years is really down to discretionary spending around capital. So CapEx, I suppose, and controlling that. And maybe, what we tend to see is the farms that are doing very well, they invest in the good years on high return stuff. So high return that'll help them through the leaner times. Unfortunately, we definitely saw that in 22, 23. Maybe the lower margin farms tended to spend a lot of their additional margin on a good year. It tends to go into depreciable assets like machinery, which is probably where it shouldn't be going, particularly when we're heading into this kind of volatile cycle.
Well, I suppose there's an argument too, Joe, like that. Okay, and I know, in fairness to you, you're very tuned in this sense. Like, farmers do need to have machinery that they can rely on and so forth, but it's the way that spend is done on a lot of farms is probably the incorrect thing that leaves them very vulnerable in a dip. Like, so instead of structuring that spend, it's a big bang of a check written maybe or whatever to buy the machine, and then we're short of the money the following 6 months later effectively because of a turn in milk price. Like,
yeah, I suppose it's not to be banging the same old drum about not spending on machinery, Stuart. Yeah, to be fair, but it's really about, and something Martina Gormley would have said, like, this year she would have done a nice bit of stuff, and even last year around, the farm infrastructure and animal handling, for example. And there's still a relatively high proportion of farms that don't have drafting facilities, for example, to allow AI to be used or to allow animal health and lameness to be managed. So, maybe there's a lack of spending on something like drafting. And I would say that by all means, on a good year, like where you'd say that there's a way to plan it out, that, things like drafting facilities, slurry storage, farm roadways for access to grazing, water systems, all of those type of things, by all means, that they have to be, done right and in place. And you can see people look at, and the other things too, maybe you could call them discretionary spend if you want. Like, there's, automation on heat detection, automation on calf feeding have become quite popular, very popular now. And the feedback from farms is that look at you can argue about the return on investment, but they still create, a bit of extra time for people and make the thing simpler. And we're all in favor of that. But that has to come on the back of good animal performance and good cost control on the day to day. Like there's, you know, these technologies don't make farms better. They make good farms easier. That's the way we probably need to look at it. And I think we see it all the time where people are promised all sorts of, life-changing effects of these different technologies and, they're going to change their performance and all the rest of it. I think in a lot of cases we should be looking and saying that the performance benefits almost in a lot of cases you'd have to wonder about, but it's the ease of management is where it's at. So I suppose I'd look at it this way, that it's a reward to good genetics in the cows. It's a reward to good grazing management. It's a reward to all the effort on grass measuring and soil fertility. If you can then, put the other facilities in place that don't put you under financial pressure, the reward to the good technical performance is to make the job easier. And I think that needs to be said, because remember a man from Donegal saying it to me one time. He says, "Look, at Teagasc are great at telling me how to spend my money." He says, "We want Teagasc to tell us how to make money, and then I'll spend it whatever way I like." And there's a lot in that too. Like, you know what I mean? If you're profitable, you can decide whatever you want to do yourself. The problem has been just it's the volatility does tend to catch some people out a little bit, and not just the bottom 20% or whatever, because we're always talking about that, and it's not about that. It's more about, just in the general sense in terms of the cash planning. So it's not about being miserly, I suppose, Stuart. It's more about planning the thing out.
Yeah, and I suppose the other thing, Joe, that always sticks out in my head from looking, like, I think I'm privileged. I have often said it to people that a lot of the farms that we visit as the specialists are always up at the top end of the game, effectively. So success breeds success, and I think, to be fair, in spite of the potential or the guaranteed lower milk price, in 2026, like the successful farms will potentially be in a position to invest in something this time next year when they're capitalizing on the quality of the genetics, the ability to manage grazing, that they will be generating a reasonable return at that stage. Like, the challenge will be in the early part of the season where costs will be basically on a par with milk price and so forth. But that's also a spin out then of the success of this year, that there will be cash in accounts to carry through that period of time. And those people are, as I said, success is breeding success for them. So they won't be as hard hit next year because they'll have had a good year this year. They're kind of structured. They're not investing because they have the money, kind of every year to potentially invest if they choose to, albeit it might be smaller investment that they do. And actually, we'll be talking about him in a second now, but talking to Conor Hogan the other day as well, he was commenting on one farm that we were on during the summer where the farmer sets out intentionally to invest in something that will make life easier the next year, every year, basically, so that there's some project on the farm every year. And just the scale of that project, now it depends on what the objective is, obviously, but the scale of the project may vary then depending on the milk price. Like, so they might have to build a shed, but they mightn't build it next year, or they mightn't start it next year, we'll say. And even if they are building that shed, that there'll be a financial structure put in place in terms of a loan or something, and a small capital contribution from the farm maybe, but they won't be trying to pay for it all. Like you said, they'll invest in the drafting. They already have it in this case, but that kind of thing,
that's the thing. Like, I mean, just actually speaking to somebody earlier today actually about this, that if you're doing a good job on the farm over a long number of years and there's a cash surplus over a good number of years and a bit of scale with it as well, a lot of the jobs that we talk about to make life easy, they get done over time, Stuart. And the cumulative effect of that is that you get into very, very workable facilities and very, very nice farms to work on. But that takes time, and it's just something that worries me a little bit, actually. There's a couple of points to just make on what you're after saying there. Well, first of all, just about that minding the cash thing is important. I know Patrick Going would have spoken about this before, but something we talked about with a group recently, pitching at around €500 per cow cash available, sort of between now and roughly, next April, before the next major milk check comes in, about 500 quid a cow. So like that's saying for your standard 120 cow herd, you need to be able to put your hands on 50 or 60,000 between now and then, just to roughly speaking. So, so you sort of start from there and you say, well, the first 50 or 60,000 is zero, and you work after that as to where you need to be. Which sounds bananas, like, and I know when we bring this up at groups to say, well, what planet are you living on? But I suppose we have to explain a little bit around that it's, you know, have you, is there maybe 10 or 15 grand of that could be merchant debt that's available to you? Maybe some of it is, the overdraft facility is cleared and everything's good that way, plus a bit of cash. Do you know what I'm trying to say? Talking to somebody the other day, and like they are still like they've sort of didn't really manage to make much of a dent in their merchant credit this year. So they don't have much headroom on the merchant credit side of things, for example. And that squeezes that available cash to them. So I'm just saying, so that 500 euro is a good working figure. And like then and like that's not us living pie in the sky. That's the real cost of it's not telling people fairy tale. It's telling people what you're going to need. And that's basically that's for everyone to work out for their own selves, but that's the scale of it. So rather than us saying that, you're doing a bad job if you don't have that, that's just kind of our best estimate of what it will take. And it's a kind of a guideline figure, and people can take that figure whatever way they want and work it for themselves. But that's the harsh reality of milking cows in Ireland. That's what it's going to take to keep it up. So, like, rather than, you hear it often too, you can probably hear it a bit from other sectors. Oh, the big milk checks and the big amount of milk coming in and all the rest of it. But that's fine. But what other sector is going to need, for 100 livestock units is going to need 50 grand to keep them going till next April, like, because of the costs involved. So the costs are high and they have to be addressed too. So, um, we're not there's we're trying to go into the spring with our eyes open here. So that's why, you talk about, these discretionary spends on items between now and the end of the year. If they take a bite out of that 50,000, Stuart, we're putting ourselves under a bit of pressure. And that's obviously then where tax planning and all that, it's too late to do a lot of that sort of stuff. And I think there's a lot of that question too. And you hear it a lot from farmers, oh, I was told I should buy this or do that to get rid of the tax bill. And that's kind of firefighting in a way too. We need a bit longer term maybe planning than that. But I get it. Easy for me to say it, right? But at the same time, I'm not saying about. I'm saying no. It's not so much what Teagasc are saying. It's more sort of our experience of what the better farmers are doing. I suppose is what we're trying to share. And that's what that five. That's where that 500 quid is coming from. I suppose the second point, in a long-winded way, I suppose, but the second point that worries me a little bit. Geez, I hope I'm not starting to sound like it wasn't like this in our day, Stuart. But I'm going to say is if you go back to sort of 2010, 2015, that 5 year bracket, when people were sort of starting out in milk or maybe growing their business a little bit at that point, there was a reality at that point that things were going to be tight and lean for a couple of years. So, you know, the really nice stuff we're after talking about in terms of collars and feeders and all that, you sort of had to do without um, at the start to get the business up and going and get some cash in, and then over time you build into those things. Maybe I'm showing me age, I don't know, but it worries me a little bit. Like we've talked about this with some of the lads through some of the industry joint programs. Oftentimes we see now where maybe a new generation coming through, they want all of those things on day one.
It's hard to not understand that, but like what would have started in the pre-quota times was minimalistic enough. There
Yeah,
was very
yeah,
few farms had drafting. There was no farms had
yeah.
collars, and
True,
there
true.
was no calf feeders either. Like, but
No,
it's
they
it
weren't available.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, so
yeah,
the expectation level is higher, all right. Yeah, no, you're right. Like people will have to be willing to take a bit of pain is the wrong term to use for it, but like there is going to have to be work put in to get the. It's I always put it in the context of the likes of Dragon's Den or something, Joe. When people do out the budgets and so forth, they tend to lose money in year one. They're losing money in year
yeah.
two, and then year three they're beginning to come. Year four, year five, that's when they're and Patrick's
Starting to
business
come. Yeah,
plans
yeah.
actually do kind of
Show
reflect that a
that.
lot of
Yeah.
the time as well. Like unless you've an
This-
established business already, and it's an expansion of an expanding or of an existing business. If you're
Yeah.
starting from scratch, it's not going to be pretty for a couple of years. Like
It's not going to be pretty for a couple of years, and you often hear that in other sectors. Well, we didn't take any money. That's a classic line that you hear. We didn't take any money out of the business for 5 years. Type of thing. When we talk about putting it all back in, Stuart, and I know we're getting off the topic here a little bit, but I just think for maybe for younger listeners, Like we're not saying that all these things are off limits, but it's a case of, you can't have your birthday and Christmas all in the one day. Like you only get one Christmas, you only get one present. We just need to be a bit careful because, and it's not to be a Grinch about it. It's more to say, those are the type of investments that are going to just catch you when the base price drops to where it might go to, and then we're looking about, financing at higher interest rates than we'd like to in the shorter term. So a bit of caution around that is all we're saying. But it will turn again, and when it turns again, have the plan in place and be ready to invest in the things that'll give you a return. Because there's plenty of people out there to take the money off the dairy farmer, and I always think that it's bloody hard earned, Stuart. It's hard earned in terms of what has to be done to generate that revenue. So, guard it and think about the decisions. And, just because we're coming off the back of a good price year, we should be looking forward about the investments rather than saying, I have a good chunk, a healthy bank, current account balance. Remember, there's a lot of, yeah, what can I spend it on? Because 500 per cow of that will be needed before next April anyway. So that's gone before we start. And look, again, taking the point entirely. There's people out there that have way more than that built up over time because of their own decisions and their own efforts, and that's great. And you know, um, we have to just get a better understanding out there in a general sense of what the things are that make that happen for people.
Okay, you've kind of teed it up there nicely as well now, Joe, in terms of investment. Like, so people that might be getting into milk, and we'll be talking about succession on the day as well, and we'll come back to that in a minute. But
Yeah.
just the breeding of the stock that people invest in, Donna's going to be talking about that at this year's conference again. 25 years or 25th anniversary basically of the introduction of EBI, and we've seen that this is the difference. This time next year there'll be people, as I said earlier, getting a reasonable price for milk, albeit off of a low base, but they'll be getting a good milk price because of the time and effort that they have put into the genetics of the herd. And like Donna started that, I suppose, along with many others who we won't go naming all of them, but Donna has been the kingpin in terms of EBI. And he's just going to talk about what has happened, but that there's more scope in what he has been doing in his career for farmers to capitalise on. And I suppose we said it there about the young people maybe coming into the industry, but there are people in the industry that haven't embraced what Donna has generated in terms of the work that he's been doing, and they maybe not getting the reward for what they're doing. And somebody has said it to me there before, and I don't know, have you even said it before? It's a real bitter pill to swallow, to think that you could be doing the exact same work as your neighbour, and because of maybe poor decision making around breeding choices and so forth, that you may not be getting the same return as they are getting, and you're doing the exact same hours and
More hours probably, yeah. Yeah, look, I'm looking forward to hearing Donna's presentation and the paper as well, because you know it's a quarter, like it's hard to believe in a way, like it's a quarter of a century. And I think that's part of the issue. Stuart, there's a lot of people out there maybe take it for granted a little bit. And I suppose it's like one of these things that it's so it's an interesting question, and about EBI. EBI is so democratic and it's so available to people. You can go in to a website, you can find an active bull listed, ranks bulls based on their economic value. You can do that you can do that for free. You can sign up for a few quid and get the bulls matched to your individual cows in your herd based on their profile. And you can get all the data and all of the planning done that you want for, a small, the cost of a good night out, basically, right? So what I'm saying is it's so democratic. And because it's so democratic, I often think, is that why some people, like we have to say though, the industry as a whole has moved hugely in that direction. Like in all fairness, like look at the changes in each co-op report. Like national proteins and fats and everything have gone up. I think there's a couple of things to say. Like definitely in 23, 24, when milk production dropped, people started saying, "Oh, geez, was that down to the have we bred the milk out of cows?" But it was one year, a terrible year for weather. Look what happened this year; it bounced back up again. So we didn't breed the milk out of cows and breed the milk back into cows in the space of 24 months. There's a lot on the feeding side and the grassland management side happening to drive the genetics gives us the potential, the grassland management and the feeding gives us gives us the actuality of it. So I suppose that's one thing. But just back to the point on it, because it's so freely available, because it's so easy to access, and because the system is so designed to be easy to present and easy to work. I've met a lot of people over the years that said, sure, it can't be that easy. Like there has to be more to it than this. Like, you know, and I do remember one time Donald, maybe he probably won't listen to this podcast, but he'd probably forgive me for saying it. And I remember years ago being down at the dairy show, and there was a guy we met there that didn't know me or Donald at the time, and probably still doesn't. But anyway, he says to us, sure, like this EBI, like sure, the fella who put together the EBI, sure, he never milked a cow in his life. That's what he said to Donna. And sure, Donna just said to him, look, I agree with you. He probably didn't, but that doesn't matter because at the end of the day, it's down to the numbers. It's do you believe that you can use data to improve the genetics in your herd? That's the question, and the irrefutable evidence is that you can, and we have, and it will continue to happen. So, like we've asked on it not to be just a history lesson, but where are we going next? And that's one of the things on genetics, I suppose, of all of the disciplines in Teagasc and disciplines in animal science overall, the rate of change in terms of scientific progress is huge. Like, so, we had the index first, and then you came in with genomics, and then you're coming now with genotyping, and then you have changes in traits and all those things all moving us along. Like, think of it this way, Stuart, 15 years ago, we would have been delighted with 10% empty after 10 or 12 weeks breeding. Now we see it as routine. Okay. There was a competition years ago to get protein 350. If we're at 350 now, we're lower than the national average, right? Calving interval has come back by nearly 2 weeks. There's still issues at farm level in terms of getting more out of the cows we have in terms of management, but still the rate of genetic gain has been huge. So I'm looking forward to hearing that story told over time. And I think we're it's actually, when we talk about new entrants, it's probably one of the biggest advantages that new entrants have now, in that if anyone wants to go out and start milking now, there are excellent genetics available to get you started with the type of cow that you need. And quick final point on that, we followed this as part of the Lakeland Dairies program over a couple of years, and the lads in the Lakeland Dairies joint program have, pushed and helped with new entrants to look at what type of stock they should buy and all the rest of it. Not picking the stock, but setting the guidelines for them. The people who follow the EBI route, they're averaging about 6 cents a litre higher gross output now than the people who didn't. That's the difference for next year.
And I suppose, Joe, just to go on to the final session, we'll say for the conference, you talked about the data-driven decision-making and so forth. So we've Elodie on the grass prediction. Sarah Walsh is going to be talking about pasture profit and clover indexes. Yeah. We'll actually be dealing with production costs, because obviously Chris Walkland will be talking about the prediction of price, but we have people that will be talking about the actual production costs for 2026 and how people are going to try and control them. And then we also have a small little bit in water quality, because obviously very topical at the moment in terms of derogation and so forth, but always an important consideration for everybody.
Yeah, we have that in the tail end of the day. What can we do to do practical step to improve water quality? We've seen that, like we looked at a lot of that ourselves this year, Stuart, and I say a lot of our advisors have done kind of simple sessions with their groups, and this is not getting, it's really practical stuff around, nutrient balance, but the nutrient management, I should say, not even nutrient balance, but nutrient management, just in terms of timing and rates of nutrient going out, but the yard stuff and the management of the water stuff. There's a huge resource there now in terms of EIPs and that, and people have engaged quite well through the asset program, but it's just to try and make sure that effort translates into stuff that's tangibly going to make a difference. So that'll be a nice practical paper, I would think. And then on the cost side of things, certainly Owen McPartland and Michael Frey need to deliver on that in Cavan and Clonmel, just to sort of benchmark where typical costs might be. We're not saying that those are the average costs for everybody. They'll be close to the average cost, but they'll be a starting point for people to benchmark for themselves. So, for example, if you're spending €100 a cow on veterinary, is that a good figure or a bad figure in this day and age? Or what's in that, for example? If you're, what are we at in terms of those figures? Sort of not quite line by line on the day, but just an example of that type of thing. So help people to pick through. Exactly, yeah. And then just Sarah and Elodie maybe on the on the clover index, we talked there a lot about the genetics in terms of the value that breeding better cows has brought to the industry. Breeding better grasses is another side of the same coin, really, isn't it? And the pasture profit index and the clover indices. So Sarah will go through that. And I've asked her to add, to sort of deal with the question of, if I'm picking if I'm picking, swords or grass seeds for a clover type sward, what do I need to take into account for that? Is there a different, would I pick a different type of grass if I'm adding in extra clover or whatever way you want to look at that? And the other one, I think it's important actually, whether we, the reality is, I suppose, at this point is that lots of dairy farmers have an outblock. They've got an outblock that has, maybe early season silage, maybe tree cuts to support the home block, plus slurry going back to that. Is there a difference in the type of swords or the varieties you'd use in that context compared to grazing? So Sarah will deal with a bit of that, which would be interesting. And then finally on Elodie then, in terms of the most model, so the grass prediction model, um, Ellie, some very nice ideas and good ideas around maybe trying to expand that network over the country, more weather data coming in, how important the nitrogen and the nutrients story is to getting a good prediction of grass growth. And maybe starting to get people to look at, if you're looking at a situation where you've got a prediction of, you know, 50 kilos for next week in the middle of May, what does that mean? What are you going to do about it? What's your grassland management decisions for the week or two ahead, which is an interesting thing. I suppose like the progress on breeding, I think we have to say it too, like the progress on grassland management is remarkable as well. But it's all data driven, Stuart. And we had a group in from Uruguay a couple of weeks ago, and it was just showing them somebody we showed one of the lads showed them the grass growth predictions on the farm and weather on a Sunday, like, which is the sign of the progress we've made, like, is that predicting grass growth for the week ahead is now part of the conversation, like. So that's Elodie will expand on that a little bit. So yeah, so look, that's the program. But I should mention too, obviously, that like we do have the minister coming to open the conference in Clonmel. Obviously the issues around nitrates and some of the policy issues around succession will be for, particularly on nitrates, I suppose, will be foremost on people's minds. And we are, we're very, very happy that the minister's coming to address the conference, and was very good and very keen that this was a part of the was a key event, because it is it's a whole of industry event, really. We're trying to aim it at farmers, but it is a whole of industry event, and that it's good to have that insight coming on the day as well.
And Joe, I suppose I left it till the end intentionally, but like Ruth and Connor have both been on the podcast in the last couple of months in relation to collaboration options and so forth. It's a very important piece for the industry. A lot of people talking about it of late, in particular, about the future of the industry being dependent on young people coming through. We've probably seen we have seen young people coming through over the last number of years, but just given what we've been talking about in terms of the swings in price and those little bits of challenges, and I suppose it's harder to get in maybe than it was in the past and so forth.
Yeah,
there's just a little bit more. It's been downplayed a little bit more about the youth coming in. But again, it comes back to what we started out talking about in terms of successful businesses. Will success breed success? So, like, we'll have farmer examples on the day in both cases. In Clonmel and Cavan, we'll have two different operations showing what their experiences of collaborative farming are and how it's worked for both of them. But it is an important piece, and lots of people need to hear that, whether you're thinking about getting out or thinking about getting in, or getting out or changing direction is something that's on your agenda in 10 years' time. There's definitely no harm in coming to listen to what Ruth and Connor will have to tell you.
100%. Somebody said that to me recently, and they were 100% right, that this kind of stuff is easy to talk about until you have to talk about it for yourself. We're all full of ideas about what can be done, but then when you have to think about it for your own situation, it can be a decision that takes it. Well, it takes more than one session to do it. It's a tough thing to get your head around, and there's part of it probably for people is, for the younger person, it's to get going and to get stuck in, and then for the other person that's incumbent, I suppose it's maybe maybe it starts feeling like you're letting go of something a bit. Do you know what I mean? And that's hard to do. It's much to do with getting your head around all that kind of stuff. So, but the main point for that session really is that there are structures in place that allow these things to be sort of planned out and modeled out. It's up to the individual then what way they want to structure within that. So look, Connor and Ruth have been very active in this, very active in this space for a long while now at this stage. It's not today or yesterday that these type of things have been talked about. But look, what have we got? Like we have an industry that's there's good infrastructure on a lot of farms. There's really part of that infrastructure is the knowledge base that's there now and the skills and the genetics and all the things we're after talking about. There is a way of making a good living out of dairy farming, Stuart. The issues are the same. And I often think about this, is it any different to, the issues that face, relatively small or medium-sized family businesses in any rural town? Like look at all the family shops or the family pubs and restaurants and things that struggle with succession because the question is, it's a family business and who wants to take it on? Um, and things like the better options or the so-called better options or perceived better options that are available off farm or away from the family business are compelling for people. The weekend work is an issue for a lot of people, and compared to for the next generation coming in to have other the flexibility of work is another thing. But the more and more we've said it, like that we talk about working from home. We said it before, like dairy farming is working from home. Lots of people are bending over backwards in other industries to try and engineer more work from home, but by definition, the dairy farm is that for most people. So there's a lot of positives too. So look, I think that to come along and hear those stories, maybe even particularly from the older generation's perspective or the incumbent generation, that how you get your head around what's beneficial to you rather than seeing it as a threat, I think is really interesting perspective, and we're delighted to have the lads coming to share that because it can't be. It's personal enough stuff, I suppose. But look, it's great to have them, and I think with the structure in place around the different models, etc. It's a matter of getting your head around those then, and then thinking about what option is right for yourself then after that.
And not that last year was any poor program or anything, but I think this is a very good program this year again, Joe. Something for everybody in it, and everybody learned something from it. And I always think of a phrase that my father-in-law says, that the day you stop learning is the day you die, and he's in his 90s. So, just to give people a bit more information on where and when, I suppose November 26th is our first day out down the south in the Talbot Hotel in Clonmel, so down in my country, and then we're up in your country the day after then, Joe. On Thursday the 27th in the Kilmore Hotel in County Cavan.
You nearly call me a caveman there, Stuart.
I'll
take that.
Broad region, Joe. Broad region. I'm not from Tip either.
You're not from Tip either. That's fine. Look and it's gas. Like we have the same program. We for years everyone said, "Oh, it's so different in one part." The country's got small from a dairy farm point of view, Stuart. Like it has the issues are the same all around the country. It's the issues. There's a bit of change in land type here and there and whatever else, but more or less, like you have the same challenges are there for farmers in the northeast and in the southwest. Like pretty much, there's obviously structural differences, but broadly, genetics, grassland management, succession, cost of production, milk price, the issues around nitrates, they're kind of universal within the country. So we're keen that we get an audience in both locations that has a farmer audience.
Okay, so Joe, so for people to register, should visit www.teagasc.ie, and you should see a tab there on the front page and click there to register then. That's all for this week's episode of the Dairy Edge podcast, and my thanks to Joe for joining me on this week's show. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe to the podcast. You can listen on Apple and Google Podcasts as well as Spotify, and for more information go to the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie, where you can also get more details in relation to the Dairy Conference this year. I'm Stuart Childs, and join me next time on your Dairy Edge.